Before Elon Musk, before Jeff Bezos, before even the idea of a billionaire existed, there was one man who rewrote the definition of wealth itself: John D. Rockefeller. The son of a traveling salesman and a devout mother, Rockefeller wasn't born into privilege. He manufactured it. Piece by piece, deal by deal, he built not just a fortune, but an empire so vast that it would outlive him by over a century. But what made Rockefeller different wasn't just his oil, it was his vision. He didn't just sell fuel, he sold the foundation of modern civilization. While others were drilling wells, Rockefeller was building systems. He created pipelines, refineries, and distribution networks that stretched across the nation, and eventually, across the world. By 1880, his company, Standard Oil, controlled over 90% of America's oil industry. That's not domination, that's monopoly at a godlike scale. And yet behind that power was something far more strategic and far more secret. Rockefeller didn't just want to be rich, he wanted his wealth to live forever. That's why, while his rivals fought over profits, Rockefeller built structures, legal, financial, and psychological, to ensure that his empire couldn't die, even if he did. He didn't think in decades, he thought in centuries. But let's rewind. The story begins in the ruthless world of the 19th century oil boom, a time when robber barons ruled and capitalism had no brakes. The streets of Cleveland and New York were filled with new millionaires, many of them reckless gamblers who struck oil and lost it just as fast. But Rockefeller was different. Quiet, calm, disciplined, and devoutly religious, he viewed money not as a thrill, but as a mission. His motto was simple: God gave me my money. While others relied on luck, Rockefeller relied on method. He would study his competitors' weaknesses, buy out their companies in silence, and crush those who refused to sell by underpricing them until they collapsed. He created what economists now call horizontal integration, controlling every step of an industry until no competitor can survive. But Rockefeller didn't stop there. He then pioneered vertical integration, owning everything from oil wells to refineries to railroads. By the time the US government realized what was happening, Rockefeller's network was untouchable. This empire didn't just control oil, it controlled information. Rockefeller's Standard Oil used agents, lawyers, and even journalists to manipulate public opinion and shape legislation. He bribed railroads to give his company secret rebates, undercutting smaller rivals who couldn't compete. He built trust companies, holding firms, and shell corporations that made it nearly impossible for regulators to track his true wealth. And then, the public turned on him. By the early 1900s, Rockefeller was seen not as a businessman, but as a villain, the face of unchecked greed. Political cartoons depicted him as an octopus, with his tentacles wrapped around the US Capitol, the press, and the economy itself. Journalists like Ida Tarbell published scathing exposés, revealing the corruption and manipulation behind Standard Oil. The government finally acted, and in 1911, the US Supreme Court ordered the breakup of Standard Oil into 34 smaller companies. For most men, that would have been the end. But for Rockefeller, it was the masterstroke. When Standard Oil was broken up, he didn't lose money. He made more. He held shares in every new company that emerged from the split. Within a few years, as the oil industry grew, his fortune multiplied fivefold. The man who was supposed to be defeated became the richest human being in history. At one point, his net worth equaled 2% of the entire US economy. Adjusted for today, that's over $400 billion. But Rockefeller knew that money alone wasn't enough. Money fades, empires crumble, names disappear. He wanted to build immortality, not through war or politics, but through legacy. And so, Rockefeller shifted his strategy. He rebranded himself not as a ruthless capitalist, but as a philanthropist, a man of faith, discipline, and purpose. He began giving away millions to science, medicine, and education. He funded universities, research centers, and foundations that would quietly reshape society. But this generosity had another layer, one the public never saw. You see, Rockefeller's philanthropy wasn't just charity. It was control disguised as compassion. His donations to medical schools came with conditions. They had to follow a new standardized system of modern medicine. His funding for the Flexner Report in 1910 revolutionized American healthcare, turning it into a scientific, pharmaceutical-based model, one that critics argue still serves corporate interests today. The Rockefeller Foundation soon became one of the most powerful private institutions on Earth, influencing everything from medicine to education to global policy. Through these foundations, Rockefeller's wealth was no longer his, it was eternal. Untouchable by taxes, preserved through legal trusts and family management structures that made it nearly impossible to dismantle. He had achieved what kings and emperors could not, a dynasty that could survive democracy itself. And as you watch this, ask yourself, how can one man's decisions, made a century ago, still shape the world we live in today? Because the truth is, Rockefeller's empire never really died. It just evolved. So before you continue, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, and tell me what you think. Was Rockefeller a visionary genius, or the architect of corporate control? Because in the next part, we'll uncover the real secret behind how Rockefeller preserved his fortune, and how the system he built still defines the modern world. When John D. Rockefeller retired in 1897, he wasn't just stepping away from business, he was stepping into history. By then, his empire was so powerful that it influenced everything from the price of kerosene in London to the fate of small oil producers in Pennsylvania. Yet Rockefeller knew one brutal truth. Empires built on power alone don't last. Empires built on systems do. And so, quietly and methodically, Rockefeller built a machine that would never die. He understood something few of his contemporaries did: that governments come and go, markets crash and recover, but structures of wealth, if built correctly, can outlive their creators. His new mission wasn't to earn money. It was to make sure that money could never truly disappear. The first step was control through invisibility. After the 1911 breakup of Standard Oil, Rockefeller's name had become poison. The public saw him as a symbol of greed, the ultimate robber baron. So, he made his fortune vanish. Not literally, but legally. He began transferring his wealth into trusts, shell companies, and charitable foundations that existed outside normal taxation and public scrutiny. By doing this, Rockefeller didn't just protect his assets from government control. He built a parallel system of power. The Rockefeller Foundation, established in 1913, was the crown jewel of this strategy. It looked like philanthropy, but it was in truth a financial fortress, one that would carry his influence across generations while keeping his fortune untouchable. He hired the brightest legal minds of his era to design an organization that would act like a business but be taxed like charity. Every dollar that went into the foundation was a dollar that could never be taxed, seized, or questioned. Yet it still worked for the family, funding projects that aligned with Rockefeller's interests: education, health, energy, and social research. To the public, it was generosity. To Rockefeller, it was longevity. But the most controversial chapter of his legacy came through his influence on medicine. At the turn of the 20th century, America's medical system was fragmented, filled with small, often homeopathic schools. Rockefeller saw opportunity. He funded the Flexner Report of 1910, which investigated medical education and recommended that only scientific, lab-based medicine, the kind reliant on pharmaceuticals and standardized education, should be recognized. The result? Hundreds of small, independent medical schools were shut down. Holistic and herbal traditions were dismissed as quackery, and a new industrial partnership was born, one between the Rockefeller Foundation and the growing pharmaceutical industry. In just a few decades, Rockefeller had reshaped medicine itself, turning it into a centralized corporate system dependent on patented drugs and research funded by private foundations. Many historians argue that this was the birth of modern Western medicine. It saved lives, yes, but it also ensured that the systems controlling health would forever be intertwined with corporate interests. Rockefeller's reach didn't stop there. Through his foundations, he quietly funded the University of Chicago, the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, which later became Rockefeller University, and numerous global programs that set the standards for science, education, and public health. Even the World Health Organization traces some of its structural DNA back to Rockefeller initiatives. But here's where the brilliance and danger of his system truly shows. By funding these institutions, Rockefeller didn't just donate money. He set agendas. When a Rockefeller Foundation gave money to a university, it wasn't simply a gift. It came with expectations. Curriculums changed. Research directions shifted. Professorships were appointed to align with specific ideologies about science, economics, and policy. Over time, this web of philanthropy became something far greater than Rockefeller himself. It became an invisible network of influence, one that shaped the thinking of generations of scholars, doctors, and policymakers, all following standards originally set by a man who died decades before. It was control without ownership, power without visibility, the ultimate form of wealth preservation. While other tycoons lost their fortunes to taxes, heirs, or inflation, Rockefeller's money kept multiplying quietly behind the walls of legal structures and endowments. Even during economic disasters like the Great Depression, his family didn't just survive, they thrived. And here's where the genius of Rockefeller's wealth strategy comes into focus. He used trust law to separate ownership from control. The assets technically belonged to the trusts and foundations, not to the family directly. That meant the family could manage them, use them, and benefit from them. But they were shielded from taxation, lawsuits, and political interference. This concept has since been copied by almost every ultra-wealthy dynasty in the world. From the Rothschilds to the modern tech elite, the system Rockefeller perfected is still used to make fortunes untouchable. But beyond the legal brilliance, there was a psychological component to his immortality too. Rockefeller was a deeply religious man. He believed his wealth was divinely ordained, a gift from God to be managed, not wasted. Every dollar had a purpose, every investment a mission. His discipline bordered on obsession. He tracked every expense, even into old age, jotting down his daily spending in small notebooks. He tithed 10% of his income long before he was rich. He read the Bible daily and conducted his business with the cold precision of someone who believed he was fulfilling destiny itself. That mindset, part faith, part obsession, became the spiritual core of the Rockefeller dynasty. His descendants inherited not just his money, but his mission: to use wealth as a tool for influence, order, and longevity. As decades passed, the family diversified. The Rockefellers entered banking, real estate, and philanthropy. They funded the Council on Foreign Relations, an organization that would later help shape U.S. foreign policy. They backed conservation programs, the arts, and science. Their hands touched nearly every field, but always with quiet, deliberate intent. Today, few realize how deep that influence goes. The Rockefeller name no longer dominates headlines, but its legacy is everywhere. In the structure of the global banking system, in the educational standards of major universities, in the DNA of modern medicine, and even in how we think about philanthropy itself. Rockefeller didn't just make wealth, he made a blueprint for power, a way to influence humanity long after his bloodline had faded. And that's the hidden secret. His fortune wasn't built to die with him. It was built to outlive civilization itself. So, as you're watching this, remember, the world we live in today still carries the fingerprints of a man who died in 1937. His name may feel like history, but his system is still alive. Most people think John D. Rockefeller's story ended with his death in 1937, but in truth, that's when his real legacy began. Because while the man disappeared, the system he engineered didn't just survive, it evolved. It became the invisible architecture of modern finance, medicine, and philanthropy. Today, we don't see Rockefeller's name stamped on oil barrels or skyscrapers. We see it in the fine print of policy papers, research grants, and billion-dollar foundations. His fingerprints are on the systems that govern how the world spends, invests, and even heals itself. Let's start with the Rockefeller Foundation, the most sophisticated piece of social engineering in economic history. What began as a legal shield for one man's fortune has become one of the most influential private institutions in the world. It funds global health initiatives, climate projects, educational reform, and economic development programs. On paper, it's charity, but in practice, it's strategy. In the early 20th century, the foundation helped create and fund the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, a policy group that still shapes U.S. foreign and economic policy to this day. Its members have included presidents, cabinet secretaries, and corporate leaders. a revolving door of influence that bridges business and government. Through the CFR, the Rockefeller network positioned itself not as an oil empire, but as a thought empire. Even more subtle was the family's entry into banking and finance. In the mid-20th century, David Rockefeller, John D's grandson, became chairman of Chase Manhattan Bank, which would later merge into J.P. Morgan Chase, now the largest bank in America. Under David's leadership, Chase wasn't just a bank, it was a diplomatic tool. Presidents called him, world leaders courted him. His private Rolodex was more powerful than the White House switchboard. David Rockefeller personally met with more heads of state than any elected official of his time. His influence was quiet but colossal. He once said, "The secret to success is to own nothing, but control everything." That line perfectly captures the philosophy passed down from his grandfather. Invisibility equals power. The Rockefeller presence also reshaped philanthropy itself. Before him, giving money away was an act of charity, emotional, personal, limited. After him, philanthropy became a weapon of influence. His foundation didn't just donate, it invested in outcomes. Education grants shaped curriculums. Health programs directed research priorities. Global aid projects set the economic policies of developing nations. This model became so successful that other dynasties copied it. The Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Endowment, the Gates Foundation, all trace their playbook back to Rockefeller's quiet revolution. Even today, billionaire philanthropy works less like generosity and more like soft power. But let's look deeper, into the part few people notice. The Rockefeller influence on medicine didn't stop with the Flexner Report. It continued into the rise of Big Pharma. Through university endowments and medical school grants, Rockefeller's network helped build a research economy that rewarded patent-based medicine. Treatments that could be owned, marketed, and controlled. Alternative and natural approaches were marginalized. By mid-century, pharmaceutical giants, companies like Pfizer and Merck, operated under models seeded by Rockefeller-funded research institutions. Modern medicine had become a vast industrial machine. It saved millions of lives, but also generated trillions in profit. And at the top of that structure sat a philosophy born in the early 1900s, the belief that centralized science and managed markets create progress. Even the United Nations and the World Health Organization, WHO, carry the DNA of Rockefeller's original global projects. His foundation funded early UN programs and helped establish the International Health Division, which predated the WHO. Through these global initiatives, Rockefeller's vision of structured, top-down health governance became reality. It's not a conspiracy, it's design. He didn't just build wealth, he built frameworks, rules and institutions that would make sure the game stayed tilted in favor of those who understood it. And here's the chilling part. Those frameworks are still running today. When central banks decide to inject liquidity, when pharmaceutical companies shape public health policies, when elite think tanks outline economic recovery plans, they are following blueprints that echo Rockefeller's original strategies. His genius wasn't in his oil, it was in his systems thinking. He saw human civilization like a corporation, with departments, governments, shareholders, the elite, consumers, the public, and managers, institutions. His goal wasn't domination through force, but coordination through control. So while politicians changed, wars came and went, and economies rose and fell, the system kept operating, adjusting, expanding, surviving. That's why even now, almost a century after his death, the Rockefeller name quietly appears in the most unexpected places. Their foundations fund climate conferences and medical research, but also maintain strong ties with financial and political networks. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund has shaped environmental policy since the 1980s, influencing global debates on fossil fuels. An ironic twist, given their ancestor built his empire on oil. It's as if the Rockefellers didn't just adapt to history, they wrote the script of it. Their wealth today is diffused across trusts, nonprofits, private equity, and investments. You'll rarely find it listed in global billionaire rankings, but make no mistake, their influence rivals, and often surpasses, that of modern tech magnates. Because while others chase visibility, the Rockefellers mastered invisibility. And that's the secret behind their wealth that won't die. It isn't money in a vault. It's an idea, one that spread across time and institutions. It's the belief that control doesn't require ownership, that the most powerful people in the world are often the ones you don't see. The irony is that the man who was once hated for his greed is now the architect of every modern billionaire's dream: to live forever through their legacy, not their lifespan. Rockefeller didn't just become the world's first billionaire, he became the first immortal capitalist. And so, in 2025, when you see foundations funding global projects, universities aligning their research with corporate goals, or economic power shifting quietly through private networks, remember, that system was designed long before your grandparents were born. It all began with a man in the 1800s who sold kerosene, and ended up illuminating the machinery of the modern world. That's the secret behind Rockefeller's wealth that won't die. It's not money that lives forever. It's the system that holds the strings. If you're still watching, hit that like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Do you think Rockefeller's system was a force for good, or a silent empire of control? Because the next time someone says money doesn't last forever, remember, they haven't met Rockefeller's ghost.